The great hall of the alien capital glowed with silver light from tall crystal pillars. Rows of banners hung from the ceiling, each one showing the proud victories of their people. Warriors, officers, and young recruits filled the chamber, waiting for the return of their hero. For weeks the council had spoken of his arrival. They said his service at the edge of the galaxy had kept their enemies at bay. They said his victories would inspire the next generation. They said his words would remind everyone of their unmatched strength. The hero's name was Turin, and he had fought for many cycles in distant campaigns. His armor was marked with deep scars from countless battles, each mark a reminder of survival. When the tall doors of the hall opened and Turin stepped inside, the crowd stood at once. They struck their chests with pride, chanting his name in one voice. The sound echoed like thunder across the high walls. Yet Turin did not smile. He did not raise his weapon in triumph. He did not walk with the same fierce step they remembered from his earlier returns. Instead, he moved with a heavy pace, his eyes dark and distant, as if he carried a weight far beyond the medals on his chest. The council elders noticed it first. They exchanged uneasy looks, wondering why their hero looked more burdened than victorious. The crowd, however, cheered louder, trying to pull some spark of pride from him. Turin stopped at the center of the hall, bowed once to the council, and then faced the warriors who had gathered to hear his stories. "My comrades," he began, his voice calm but sharp enough to silence the cheers. "You have called me home to share victories, but what I bring is not celebration. It is truth." The sudden seriousness spread through the hall like a wave. Young recruits leaned forward, eager to hear his tales. Veterans folded their arms, waiting to compare his words with their own years of service. Turin lifted his hand to the scarred surface of his armor. "I have fought the scaled raiders of the Rim. I have held the line against the machine swarms. I have stood firm against the burning clans. But none of these were the battles that tested me most." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the crowd. The silence grew deeper. Even the banners above seemed to hang heavier in the still air. "The greatest challenge I faced," Turin said slowly, "was against a young race that many of you do not yet understand. They are called humans." Murmurs broke out at once. Some warriors exchanged confused looks. Others laughed quietly, as if the name itself sounded unworthy of a warrior's fear. The council tried to quiet the noise, but the disbelief filled the room like sparks from a fire. Turin stood tall, his voice rising over them. "You doubt because you have not seen them. You laugh because you believe they are weak. I once believed the same. I thought they were fragile, small, and without order. But what I found was something far different. They are unlike any enemy I have ever faced." The laughter died quickly. The crowd sensed the weight in his words. The young recruits who had smiled at the strange name now shifted uneasily in their seats. Turin's gaze dropped for a moment, as though the memories themselves pressed hard against him. "When I first stood against humans, I thought victory would come in moments. My legion marched with perfect discipline. Our weapons were stronger. Our shields were tested in thousands of battles. Yet the humans did not break. They did not flee. They stood against us with a fire I had never seen before." A warrior near the front shouted, "How could such a race resist us?" Turin fixed his eyes on him. "That is why I speak now. So that you will understand. So that none of you will make the mistake I made. Humans may look weak, but their strength is not in what you see. It is hidden in their will." The hall grew colder. The sound of voices faded until only Turin's voice remained. Even the youngest listener could feel that these were not tales of simple battle, but warnings of something greater. "They do not fight like us," Turin said. "They do not fight with perfection or with endless training. They fight with something else. Something that cannot be measured. And that is why I call them the most dangerous foe I have ever faced." He let the words sink in, his silence carrying as much weight as his speech. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, the recruits straightened, the veterans frowned in thought, and the council whispered among themselves. Torin stood alone in the center of the hall, his figure heavy with scars, his voice echoing in the minds of all who heard him. The hero they had called home to inspire them had instead delivered a shadow of unease. For the first time in many cycles, the proud warriors of the hall felt something they rarely admitted to feeling. They felt the stir of doubt. And it came not from defeat, but from the warning of their own war hero. The hall was silent after Torin's first words. His comrades waited, their thoughts caught between pride and disbelief. Some wanted to dismiss his warning as fear carried home from war, but others leaned forward, eager to know more. The name of this strange species humans hung heavy in the air. Torin drew a slow breath before continuing. His eyes seemed far away, as if he was no longer standing in the great hall but back on a distant battlefield. My first meeting with humans, he said, came at the border world of Duran. It was a place of stone valleys and dry winds. Our scouts reported a small force defending the settlement, nothing more than a group of inexperienced fighters. We believed it would fall within a day. I led the charge myself. The crowd straightened, waiting to hear of swift victory. Many nodded, certain the tale would end with the humans crushed under alien might. At first, Torin said, it seemed the reports were correct. Their numbers were few. Their weapons were smaller than ours. Their bodies looked thin, and their armor was little more than layers of fabric and metal plates. I remember my soldiers laughing as we advanced, thinking it would be an easy triumph. But then the ground itself betrayed us. He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the shock. The humans had dug traps into the sand and covered them with stone. As we marched forward, whole lines of my soldiers fell into pits. Spears made of sharpened metal waited at the bottom. Others triggered explosions hidden beneath the soil. The humans did not meet us head-on. They forced us to stumble, to bleed before the real battle had even begun. A wave of murmurs spread through the hall. Traps were considered dishonorable by many of Torin's people. To them, victory came from strength and direct combat. One recruit raised his voice. So they are cowards, hiding behind tricks. Torin's gaze was sharp as he answered. No. They are not cowards. They are clever. They use everything the land gives them. They fight with their minds as much as their weapons. It was not cowardice that slowed us. It was their skill in turning weakness into strength. The room quieted again. Even the veterans, who had seen countless wars, looked thoughtful. Torin continued. When we broke through the traps, I expected them to scatter. But they stood firm. They had no perfect formation. They shouted to one another, giving orders through voice instead of command signals. It was chaotic, confusing to watch. Yet somehow it worked. Each time one fell, another stepped in. Each time we thought we had broken them, they pushed back harder. Their line did not collapse. It bent and bent again, but it did not break. He lifted his hand and clenched it into a fist, his voice carrying the weight of memory. I saw them fight with broken weapons. I saw them hurl stones when their guns ran dry. I saw one human, wounded and unable to stand, still striking at my soldiers with his bare hands. This was not the weakness I had expected. This was something I could not name at the time, but now I know it as their spirit. Gasps echoed from the young recruits. They had been trained to believe that spirit alone could not win battles, that only numbers, weapons, and discipline mattered. Torin's words cut against everything they had been taught. He went on. We forced them back, but the cost was higher than I had ever paid for such a small victory. My legion lost more in that fight than in campaigns against stronger enemies. When we stood at last inside their settlement, we expected surrender. But even then, the humans did not kneel. They watched us with eyes full of fire, even as prisoners. That day, I learned they are not shaped by fear. They are shaped by defiance. One of the council elders finally spoke, his voice cautious. And you believe this first encounter means they are more dangerous than others we have faced? Torin nodded. Yes. Because they do not see battle the way we do. Where we seek honor, they seek survival. Where we follow strict order, they trust in sudden change. Where others accept defeat, they fight until nothing is left. That is what I saw at Durin. And that was only the beginning. The hall shifted uneasily. The image of fragile humans had already begun to change in their minds. They pictured not weak beings, but clever warriors who turned every stone and shadow into weapons. Torin stood firm in the center, his scarred armor catching the light of the crystal pillars. His voice lowered, steady but sharp. Remember this truth. Underestimate them, and you will not face an easy battle. You will face a storm that grows stronger with every strike against it. The silence that followed was heavy, filled not with pride but with the first trace of unease. The war hero who had once brought only stories of glory now spoke of a race that refused to yield. For the first time, many in the hall wondered if victory over such an enemy would ever be as simple as they had believed. The great hall remained heavy with silence after Torin's words about the Battle of Durin. The warriors shifted in their seats, some still doubtful, others beginning to wonder if their hero's warning carried more weight than they wanted to believe. The young recruits looked uneasy, as if the ground beneath their training had suddenly turned uncertain. Torin did not pause long. He knew their doubts would only grow stronger if he allowed silence to linger. Raising his head, he continued. My next battle with the humans came not in deserts and stone valleys but on a wide plain of grass, open and endless. It was there that I witnessed their true nature, and it shook me more than any trap or trick. On that plain, I learned how they charge without fear. The warriors leaned forward. They were trained in formation combat, drilled until every movement was precise. To them, order was victory. The thought of an enemy who fought without such order seemed laughable. Yet the tone of Torin's voice made laughter impossible. We marched in perfect lines, Torin said. Shields locked, weapons ready, every soldier moving as one. Our discipline has broken countless foes. We believed no force could withstand our advance. The humans waited on the far side of the field, scattered and unorganized. They spoke loudly to one another, shouted across their ranks, even argued in plain sight. My soldiers laughed when they saw it. We thought we faced fools who would crumble in moments. He clenched his fists slowly. Then the charge began. The listeners held their breath as Torin spoke. They did not wait for us to come to them. They ran forward at full speed, shouting not in fear but in wild strength. Their formation broke apart before it even began, but instead of weakness, it became a storm. Each group of humans moved like a separate wave, striking where they pleased. They were loud, chaotic, and without order. Yet they were unstoppable. My soldiers had no time to adjust. The humans struck at our flanks, at our center, and even from behind. Their shouts confused our signals. Their speed broke our rhythm. For every strike we landed, they answered with two. A veteran warrior spoke from the side. Without order, how could they win? How could they fight without command? Torin's gaze hardened. Because they trust their chaos. They do not wait for orders to move. Each one thinks for himself, and yet together they form something stronger. Their disorder becomes their unity. Where one stumbles, another fills the gap without waiting. Where one falls, another steps in without command. It is not the unity of our people, built on strict obedience. It is the unity of shared will. That is what makes them so dangerous. The hall grew tense. The younger recruits frowned, struggling to imagine a battlefield without lines and signals. The veterans, however, understood the danger. They had seen how even small breaks in formation could lead to defeat. An enemy that embraced chaos, that turned disorder into power, was a threat unlike any other. Torin continued, his voice steady. I saw humans rush into weapons fire with no shield to protect them. I saw them leap into danger where no hope should exist. They did not stop to measure risk as we do. They threw themselves forward as if death itself was nothing to fear. I thought them reckless at first, but soon I understood. They are fearless because they value victory more than survival. They are willing to fall if it means their people will stand. He let his words settle into the minds of his comrades. The silence in the hall was heavy, broken only by the sound of shifting armor as warriors moved uneasily. One moment remains burned in my memory, Torrens said. A group of my soldiers had cornered a band of humans near a ridge. There were no more than 20 of them, facing more than 100 of us. By every measure, the fight was finished. Yet when the call to surrender was given, they did not drop their weapons. They looked at one another, shouted their strange cries, and charged down upon us. They should have been crushed in seconds, but their sudden attack broke through our front line. By the time we regained control, half of them had fallen, yet the rest escaped. Their charge had no logic, no chance of success, but it carried a strength we could not resist. The recruits whispered in disbelief. The veterans shook their heads, troubled by the picture forming in their minds. The elders of the council remained quiet, their eyes sharp as they studied Torren. He ended with a voice that echoed through the chamber. You may think their lack of order makes them weak, but hear me well. Their chaos is not weakness. It is a weapon sharper than any blade. Their advance is not reckless. It is fearless. Against them, perfection does not guarantee victory. Against them, even the strongest formation can be broken. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hall, once filled with confidence, now carried a quiet unease. The image of humans had shifted again. No longer were they fragile survivors in the desert. Now they were fearless warriors who could shatter even the strongest lines. Torren stood in the center, silent now, his scarred armor reflecting the dim light. His comrades looked upon him with new eyes, and though none admitted it aloud, a single thought stirred in many hearts. If such a race could not be broken by discipline, what force in the galaxy could truly stop them? The hall was filled with uneasy silence. The recruits who once whispered proudly now sat still, their eyes wide. Veterans who had fought in dozens of wars crossed their arms tightly, their faces troubled. The council elders leaned forward, no longer dismissing Torren's words as exaggeration. Each story had stripped away the image of humans as weak. Now, they appeared as enemies who fought with chaos and courage that could not be ignored. Torren stood in the center of the chamber, his scarred armor catching the silver light of the crystal pillars. He let the silence grow before he spoke again, his voice low and steady. The next lesson I learned about humans came on a frozen world called Vera. It was a place of endless ice fields, mountains of snow, and winds sharp enough to cut through armor. Many of you know such worlds well. You know how they test even the strongest armies. On Vera, I saw not only human strength in battle, but something even greater. I saw their endurance. The warriors in the hall shifted, curious. They had faced harsh worlds before and knew how difficult survival could be. Few could last long without supply lines and shelter. Torren's eyes darkened as he remembered. Our legions had landed with full supplies. Food, heat generators, fuel cells, everything needed to endure the cold. Even with all of this, we struggled. The winds froze our weapons. The storms buried our shelters. Many of our soldiers fell sick or weakened, unable to march. Yet the humans did not stop. They moved through the storms as though the ice itself feared them. He walked slowly across the hall, his voice steady. We watched them march with thin tents and small fires. They wrapped themselves in animal hides, skins taken from the beasts of the frozen plains. Where we relied on machines, they used their hands. Where we needed supply chains, they survived on whatever they could find. They melted snow for water, they hunted wild creatures for food, and they never slowed their pace. My soldiers stared in disbelief. We could not understand how they lived with so little, and yet they marched farther than us. A young recruit raised his hand timidly. Perhaps they had no choice but to keep moving. Torin's gaze fixed on him. That is exactly what makes them dangerous. Where others would wait for rescue, where others would accept the cold as defeat, the humans pressed on. They turned suffering into fuel. Every hardship only hardened them more. It was as if the storms themselves forged them into stronger warriors. The hall grew still again. Torin continued, his tone heavier with each word. One night, my scouts reported humans marching through a blizzard so fierce that even my strongest soldiers refused to go outside. We thought surely they would perish. But when the storm cleared, they had not only survived. They had crossed the mountain ahead of us and set traps along our path. Imagine it. While we huddled in shelters with heat generators, they had climbed a mountain in the middle of a storm and prepared an ambush. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The recruits looked shocked. Even the veterans frowned deeply, knowing how impossible such a feat should have been. Torin raised his scarred hand. I watched them fight in the cold with frost clinging to their armor. I saw them march with cracked lips and frozen skin, yet their eyes burned with fire. When their supplies ran low, they did not beg for aid. They cut apart their own machines for fuel. They used broken armor as shovels to dig through snow. They never stopped, not even for the storm, not even for hunger. This is what I mean by endurance. They do not only survive. They conquer the very world itself. The words struck hard. The warriors knew many armies that had fallen not from enemies but from the cruelty of nature. If humans could survive and even thrive where others perished, they were more than a military threat. They were a force shaped by hardship itself. Torin's voice grew louder, carrying through the hall. Do not mistake this endurance for luck. It is their nature. They accept pain, and they endure it until pain becomes strength. Where we would retreat, they advance. Where we would wait, they press forward. They are like the ice itself, slow, relentless, unbroken. They cannot be worn down, because every strike against them only makes them harder. A heavy silence followed. The recruits no longer whispered. They sat frozen, as if the cold winds of Vera had reached the hall itself. Veterans bowed their heads, remembering their own struggles on harsh worlds and realizing how easily their people might have faltered where humans did not. Torin stood still at the center, his voice now calm again. That is what I learned on Vera. The humans' greatest weapon is not only their courage or their chaos. It is their endurance. They will walk through storms that break machines. They will march on hunger and thirst. They will fight with frozen hands if they must. Against them, time is not our ally. Because the longer a battle lasts, the stronger they become. The weight of his words pressed upon everyone in the hall. The image of humans had changed once more. Now they were not only clever with traps, not only fearless in battle, but also unyielding against the very elements of nature. For the first time, the proud warriors of the Great Hall began to wonder if such an enemy could ever truly be defeated. The Great Hall was now wrapped in uneasy silence. Torin's words had painted humans as clever, fearless, and unyielding. The image of fragile beings had been shattered. Warriors who once laughed now sat in heavy thought. Even the council elders, who prided themselves on wisdom, looked troubled. Torin stood in the center, his scars glowing faintly in the silver light of the pillars. He did not speak quickly. He allowed his comrades to carry the weight of what he had already told them. Then, with a steady voice, he began again. My next lesson came not from storms or plains but from something deeper. It came from the way humans stand together. I learned of their unity, and it is more dangerous than any weapon they carry. The words caught attention. His people valued unity above all. Their legions moved as one mind, trained in discipline and obedience. To suggest that another species had stronger unity seemed almost impossible. Torin's voice grew firmer. On the world of Karen, our legions fought against 3 human groups. At first, I believed this would be simple. These groups did not share language or banner. They came from different nations and fought under different leaders. I thought they would clash with one another. I thought their division would break them. Instead, I saw something that shook me to my core. The crowd leaned forward, waiting. He continued. When danger came, their differences vanished. They argued, yes. They shouted at one another even in the middle of battle. But when our forces attacked, they moved as one. They defended one another without hesitation. They filled the gaps in each other's lines. It was as if they had been trained together since birth, though I knew they had not. Their bond was not made by order. It was made by choice. The hall stirred uneasily. His people's unity was born of bloodlines, command signals, and training. They could not understand how strangers could fight as one. Torin's eyes narrowed with memory. I saw men and women from different lands fight side by side. When one fell, another rushed to carry him. When one commander fell silent, another voice rose without pause. There was no confusion, no collapse. It was not the unity of command. It was the unity of will. That is something we cannot easily match. A recruit raised his voice, trying to resist the unease. But they fight with arguments. How can such a bond be strong? Torin looked directly at him. Because their arguments are not weakness. They argue because each has his own mind. But when danger rises, they set aside those arguments in an instant. Their unity is not forced. It is chosen. That is what makes it stronger than ours. The recruits sat back down, their faces pale. The council whispered among themselves, troubled. Torin's voice lowered, heavy with weight. I will tell you what I saw on Karen. In one battle, our forces had surrounded a group of humans. There were soldiers from 3 nations there. We thought they would scatter, each protecting their own. Instead, they joined together in a circle, back to back, fighting for one another as though they had been brothers for life. Our numbers were greater. Our weapons were stronger. Yet we could not break them. Every time one line fell, the others closed the gap. Every time one leader fell, another stepped forward. Their unity was unbreakable. A deep silence filled the hall. Warriors shifted uncomfortably. Veterans lowered their eyes. Torin's hand pressed against the scarred surface of his chest plate. You see, their strength does not lie in a single banner or a single voice. It lies in the bond they choose to share. They are not one because they must be. They are one because they decide to be. And that choice makes them impossible to divide. The council elder who had spoken earlier now leaned forward. So you mean, even when divided, they can still stand as one? Yes, Torin answered firmly. They may fight among themselves, they may disagree, they may even go to war with one another. But when an outside enemy threatens them, they unite with a force that nothing can match. I saw enemies become allies in the space of a heartbeat. I saw strangers shield one another with their lives. That is the dangerous unity of humans. The warriors in the hall no longer spoke. They understood the weight of his words. They had believed unity belonged only to them. Now they saw that humans held a unity more flexible, more powerful, because it was born not of command but of choice. Torin stood tall, his voice carrying through the chamber. Do not mistake their divisions as weakness. Do not believe their arguments will keep them apart. When the time comes, they will stand together. And when they stand together, there is no force in the galaxy that can break them. The light from the crystal pillars flickered as if the hall itself carried his warning. Warriors who once laughed at the thought of humans now looked at one another with unease. Recruits who had dreamed of easy glory now sat in silence, their dreams shaken. Even the elders whispered no answers. For the first time, the Great Hall seemed less like a place of triumph and more like a place of reckoning. And Turin, their war hero, stood alone in the center, his voice still echoing in their hearts. The Great Hall had grown heavier with each of Turin's words. What began as laughter at the idea of fragile humans had turned into silence, then unease, and now a quiet fear none wished to name. The warriors shifted in their seats, the recruits avoided one another's eyes, and even the council elders sat with furrowed brows. Turin stood in the center, scarred armor gleaming faintly in the silver light of the pillars. He had told them of human cleverness, their fearless charges, their endurance, and their unity. Now he drew a long breath, his eyes fixed on the floor as though what he was about to share weighed heavier than all that came before. When I first faced humans, Turin said, his voice steady but low, I thought they were reckless. I thought they were simply throwing themselves at death. But I was wrong. There is something deeper that drives them. Something that makes them more dangerous than any species we have ever fought. That is the truth I now carry. The hall grew still. No one dared interrupt. Turin's gaze lifted, and his eyes burned with memory. On the world of Lyra, our legions faced a siege. We had surrounded a human stronghold, cutting off their food, their water, their supplies. By every rule of war, they should have surrendered. Weeks passed, and yet they did not yield. Instead, they fought harder. Their numbers grew fewer, but their spirit grew stronger. And then they did something I had never seen before. He paused, letting the tension settle over the crowd. They turned their own broken ships into weapons. They stripped them of engines, filled them with explosives, and hurled them into our lines. Those ships were meant for travel, not war. They were already ruined, useless for escape. But the humans saw another purpose in them. They used their own wreckage to shatter our siege. Many of them perished in the blasts, yet they did not hesitate. Their sacrifice broke our line and gave the rest of them a chance to fight free. Gasps rose from the recruits. Even the veterans looked shaken. To them, weapons were forged for war and ships for travel. To see a people twist destruction into victory was something beyond imagination. Turin's voice grew stronger. This is the truth about humans. They do not fear loss. They do not cling to survival the way others do. They will give everything if it means their people endure. Where we measure victory by what we keep, they measure victory by what they are willing to give up. That is why they are dangerous. Because they will sacrifice without hesitation. A young warrior rose to his feet, his face pale. But that is madness. No people can fight like that forever. Turin's eyes met his, sharp and unyielding. Madness or not, it is their strength. They fight not for honor, not for reward, but for the survival of their kind. Every loss fuels their fire. Every fallen soldier becomes a story that pushes the next to fight harder. I have seen it. I have felt it. And I tell you this now, the more you strike them, the stronger they become. The hall trembled with silence. Warriors who once believed themselves unbreakable now felt the chill of doubt. Turin raised his scarred hand, his voice cutting through the stillness. Do you know what I fear most? It is not their weapons or their numbers. It is not their traps or their charges. What I fear most is their will. Because no matter what stands against them, they find a way. They invent, they endure, they sacrifice, and they rise again. Strike them down, and they return stronger. Corner them, and they break free. Crush them, and their memory fuels those who follow. That is the brutal truth of humans. The words echoed in the chamber. The recruits sat frozen, their training shaken. The veterans bowed their heads in thought, unwilling to meet each other's eyes. The elders of the council exchanged dark looks, as if the ground beneath their pride had shifted. Turin lowered his hand and spoke more softly, though his words carried to every ear. You believe power comes from strength alone. But humans know another path. They know power comes from sacrifice. They are willing to give their lives so their children may rise. They are willing to burn everything they own if it buys them one more victory. That is why I tell you they are unlike any enemy we have ever known. And that is why I call them dangerous beyond measure. He fell silent, his words hanging heavy in the air. For the first time, the warriors of the Great Hall did not feel pride at hearing their hero speak. Instead, they felt the shadow of something larger than themselves. Torin's gaze swept across them, his eyes hard and steady. Do not laugh at them. Do not dismiss them. Do not underestimate them. For if you do, you will find that humans are not just fighters. They are survivors, inventors, and builders of victory from ruin itself. That is the truth I have learned, and it is a truth you must not forget. The hall remained silent long after he finished, the echo of his words lingering like a storm yet to break. The silence inside the great hall stretched on. Every warrior, every recruit, every elder sat in stillness after Torin's words. For the first time in many years, they felt something unusual. It was not fear of an enemy's weapon. It was the weight of understanding. Torin stood tall, but his eyes showed the burden of the truths he carried. He had not spoken to frighten them, nor to bring shame. He had spoken to prepare them, and he was not yet finished. He raised his hand, and his deep voice broke the silence. You must listen to what comes next, for it is not only a truth but also a warning. You may think humans are only a danger on the battlefield, but that is not the whole of it. Their strength is not only in war. It is in their nature. It is in how they live, how they think, and how they unite. The council elders leaned forward. Even the proudest veterans, who once thought humans weak, now gave him their full attention. Torin continued. I have seen how they rebuild. After battle, after fire, after ruin, they return to the ground they lost. They clear the rubble, they raise new homes, and they do not stop until the place thrives again. They plant where the soil is burned. They sing where the air is heavy with smoke. They smile again even when they should not. That is how they rise after every fall. Tell me, what kind of enemy is that? A murmur spread through the hall. The younger warriors exchanged uneasy glances. The elders spoke in low voices to one another, their pride fighting with the truth that Torin laid bare. But Torin's voice rose again. Do not think their will ends with rebuilding. They remember everything. They pass down stories to their children, so no defeat is ever lost to time. A battle may end, but the story of it lives on in them. That story makes their children stronger, and their children's children stronger still. When you fight one human, you fight the spirit of all who came before. You fight a people who do not forget. A veteran finally spoke, his tone firm though his hands trembled slightly. If they are as you say, then how have they not conquered all already? Torin nodded, for he had expected this question. Because they are still few compared to us. Because their worlds are still young and growing. But do not mistake this for weakness. It is only time that stands between them and greatness. Give them years, and they will spread farther than we can see. Give them struggle, and they will sharpen themselves against it. They are not yet what they will become. That is why I bring this warning now. We must decide how we will face them before the day comes when they rise beyond our reach. The hall grew restless. Some shifted in discomfort. Others whispered of alliances, of strategies, of what it would mean if humans grew as Torin predicted. The old council leader, his voice rough with age, finally spoke. You tell us they cannot be broken. You tell us they grow stronger through loss. Then tell us, Torin, what do you suggest? How do we face such an enemy? All eyes turned back to the scarred war hero. Torin did not speak right away. He let the weight of the question linger before answering. Do not face them as fools. Do not treat them as lesser. If we fight them, we must understand that every victory will cost us more than we expect. Every battle will forge them sharper. Every strike will make them remember. If you want to survive against them, you must respect what they are. If you do not, you will fall. A chill spread through the gathering. The recruits lowered their heads, their earlier pride turned to thoughtfulness. The veterans clenched their fists, understanding the meaning hidden in his words. The elders sat in heavy silence, the truth gnawing at their plans. Torin's voice softened now, though it still carried to every corner of the hall. I do not say this to glorify them. I do not say this to shame us. I say this because it is the truth. Humans are not gods, and they are not demons. They are something else. They are survivors who turn struggle into strength. If we forget that, if we dismiss them as weak, then we will face a storm we cannot stop. The last of his words settled over them like a final weight. No one moved. No one dared to laugh or scoff. The truth had sunk too deep. At last, Torin stepped back, his scarred hand resting on the hilt of his blade. His eyes swept across the hall one last time. Remember this warning. The day will come when humans rise higher than any expect. On that day, you will look back on my words. Do not forget them. For those who forget will be the first to fall. With that, the great warrior turned and walked from the hall. His steps echoed on the stone floor, each strike of his boots sounding heavier than the last. No one called after him. No one dared to break the silence. Behind him, the council, the veterans, and the young recruits sat in uneasy thought. Their pride had been shaken, their certainty cracked. And in the stillness, one truth echoed louder than all: the humans were not to be underestimated. The hall that once roared with laughter now carried only silence. And within that silence, Torin's warning lived, sharp and unyielding, like a blade drawn against the future.